Tom Steenberg. I'm the Dean of the Owen School, and I'd like to welcome you to our very first live podcast event. We're thrilled to have you here. This event marks the second year of our 1,000 Ways to Lead podcast and a big milestone of 20 years of the Leadership Development Program at Owen. It's absolutely delighted to have you with us. Today's episode will feature our very own 2015 MBA alum, Jamie Eichard, and our three second-year hosts, Taiwu, Mari, and Melissa. Welcome to our alums, our prospective students and friends joining via the live stream. We're thrilled to have you join the students in the room for what's sure to be an inspiring and insightful conversation. Our hope is that each of you walks away with an insight or two that helps you along on your leadership journey. And with that, let me get out of the way and help us get started.
Thank you so much, Dean Steenberg. I want to thank all of you for being here in this room and all of you who are joining virtually as well. We're so excited to welcome Jamie Eichard. Jamie graduated from Owen with her MBA in 2015 and is now the Chief Strategy and Transformation Officer at Hire Right. Melissa, Taiwo, and I had the opportunity to sit down and chat with Jamie and just get to know her a few weeks ago. And I have to say, I think I can speak on behalf of all three of us that we left that meeting feeling very, very inspired. And my hope is that all of you in the room today and all of you who are live streaming this podcast will also leave feeling very inspired just like we did. Not only is Jamie a go-getter, but she's extremely intentional about all the decisions that she makes. So thank you, Jamie, so much for taking your afternoon to be with us today.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Marie, and hello to everybody. It is such an honor to be here and back on Owen's campus. Truly such a joy. And I'll kind of kick off by saying, you know, the fact that we're in this room having this conversation already tells me so much about those who are in here listening, indulging in this conversation, right? You are here because you want to be. You're here because you've decided to lean into leadership, right? Not just business, not just how to run a company, but to lean into leadership, right? You're here because you want to be. And I think you're here because you want to learn a little bit more in terms of how to lead with clarity, perhaps how to remove ambiguity, perhaps more self-awareness, right? These are all things that define great leaders. And I kind of say that's rare, right? One of the key takeaways that I've had throughout my career is great leadership doesn't happen through accidental discovery. It's actually designed, and it's designed with a lot of intentionality and, importantly, a lot of reflection, right? So we're here to talk a little bit about that today. You know, it's interesting. I've been able to see kind of a lot of leaders throughout my career, a lot that I admire, a lot that I've learned from, either the good and the bad. And it's interesting because what I'd argue is a lot of leadership is just generally inherited, right? It can be inherited from perhaps a mentor. It can be inherited perhaps from a boss. It can be inherited perhaps from just frankly being in survival mode, right? You had to put one foot in front of the other. Well, that's interesting, and it's hopefully, you know, maybe something that you've seen throughout your career, but that can be problematic, right? And as leaders, what happens when it's an inherited leadership style is it generally can become inconsistent, right? You've got this inconsistency because you talked to Sarah yesterday, and that means that, you know, you're showing Sarah today to your team, right? It could mean that perhaps you're inauthentic, and that can be a problem, right? And I would say it can be incongruent with your values and your motives, and that most certainly is problematic. And so I think today we're really here to talk a little bit more about what I call, you know, leadership architecture, right? Leadership by design. And it's really kind of been a core part of my leadership kind of journey, and in earnest it started here at Owen, right? I had 2 amazing years to really reflect on who I am. And it's something that has really become a common thread throughout my career, whether it was iBanking, whether it was consulting, entrepreneurship, jumping into VC tech, PE technology in my current role. You know, you'll notice that this intentional design kind of plays a role in terms of when and how I pivot, also how I show up to my teams, right? And while each chapter in my career might look a little bit different, there's this commonality and this kind of throughput throughout the career. So today we're going to talk a little less about, you know, titles, a little less about tactics. Today, really, hopefully, we get to lean into kind of how you build your own leadership architecture or leadership by design, right? I've got these 5 guideposts that I've accumulated throughout my career. They're mine, and maybe you guys will pick up 1 or 2 of these guideposts and say, maybe I should have that guidepost. Maybe it'll inspire a guidepost that I haven't thought about that I hope you'll tell me about afterwards, right? But hopefully this will give you a few things as you're in your first or second year at ON to really start noodling on now, to be really intentional on in now, so that as you progress throughout your career, it's kind of a core or anchor for you for how you make decisions, how you show up, and how you show up for your teams, right?
Thank you. And so we'll be discussing some of those guideposts today. But first, Jamie, as you talked about before, you've worked in a lot of different industries. Yeah. You've held a lot of different functions. Investment banking, you mentioned, consulting, hospitality, fintech, and more. But behind all of those pivots, there's been a lot of intentionality,
That's
like
right.
I've discussed before and you've discussed as well. So can you give us a bit of an overview of some of these pivots you've made in your career, both before ON and post-ON?
Yeah, I will, and I would always say I do think pivots are such an important part of everybody's journey, right? And I think my guidance or my advice to everyone listening, to each one here, is really taking the time in those pivot moments as you're entering a pivot moment, be it a promotion, a job switch, a geography move, et cetera, to really be intentional about what the motives are, right? And so I'll walk through my background. I might back up just by way of framing for this conversation to anchor everybody in the 5 guideposts that we're going to kind of circle through today. I think the 5 guideposts that are going to kind of dictate some of these pivots and some of the architecture that we'll talk about start to look a little bit like this, right? I've got what I will call my mirror, right? And that's guidepost number 1 for me. And my mirror is, simply put, my motivators and my stressors, right? These are the things that I reflect on that represent either what energized me or stressed me out. So that's my guidepost number 1. We'll unpack that one here shortly. Guidepost number 2 for me is what I call my compass, right? This is my core value set that helps me make decisions day in and day out. The velocity of decisions only gets greater, only with more consequences as you progress throughout your career. And so having some anchor, some guidepost, some compass to draw back from has been incredibly important. And again, things that I started to craft out at ON. The next piece is what I call my map, right? And this is, my map is my leadership roadmap, as it were. I'm a huge fan of kind of speaking the unspoken. And my map is really my commitment to myself and to my team to exposing what my leadership style is. It's what I expect from my team. It's what I commit to from my team. It's how they can expect me to show up, right? And it's something I've been really intentional about, right? I started designing very, very early on in my career. And then the 4th guidepost that I've got is my feedback loop, right? My feedback loop is my own personal board of directors that I've established throughout my career. I had this thesis pretty early on that one mentor is not enough, and so kind of have gone through this journey of accumulating, this personal board of directors, right? And so this is my feedback loop. And then my 5th guidepost is kind of my blueprint, or it's my operating model for any time I enter a company. What are the general things that I attack and in what order, right? And so those are kind of my 5 guideposts. I'll try to pull some threads as we go through the conversation today. But let me give a little bit on my background, just so you guys have a little context, and I'll go through this pretty quickly. Right out of college, I jumped into investment banking. Why? I knew I was good at finance, right? This was the idea. I'm good at finance. What's that mean? Oh, you should maybe consider something with numbers. Okay, great. I'm going to go to iBanking. I jumped into a little company called Lehman Brothers back in the heyday. Maybe some of you guys have heard about it. It was 2007. It was a fascinating time to be at Lehman Brothers. I was in New York City. I was in the TMT, or technology vertical, and it was a fascinating time to be there. What I realized enter a pivot moment, what I realized is, as much as I enjoyed the analytical side, I wanted broader exposure to the business toolkit, right? That was just me, but for me, I felt like I wanted to learn more about all aspects of business, the entrepreneurs that were coming in for their IPOs, right? The CEOs that were having to make hard decisions about LBOs, and so decided, okay, iBanking was awesome. I want to maybe have a broader scope or broader remit. Had someone say, have you thought about this thing called consulting? I said, tell me more, and was lucky enough to stumble into strategy consulting at Bain & Company, and just right before Lehman collapsed, actually. So there was a bit of fortune to that piece, too. I was at Bain & Company during a fascinating time. It was right before the recession hit. So, my original casework was, how do you drive revenue, right? And what's the next billion-dollar idea? And then that very quickly transitioned to, when the recession hit, how do you take $500 million out of the P&L, right? We've got to really lean into cost saving. So while there were some difficult decisions to being made at the time, it gave me pretty good exposure to the profit equation and some of the toolkits. It's interesting. I've started to find myself perhaps not fully energized in the way I entered Bain, and that was not because Bain wasn't an awesome culture and an awesome program and I had awesome mentors. But what I realized for me, and I hit this kind of, energy stall out, was I wanted to be a part of the change, right? I wanted to be a part of the change. And while I liked creating 5-year strategies, I really wanted to help implement the things. So in a whim, decided if ever I was going to move out of the country and start my own business, why not do it in the midst of a recession? So my husband and I decided to move out of the country, move to the nation of Panama. More on that one for a different day, why Panama, but a beautiful country. And we stood up a couple of REITs, which was great. And we acquired, as part of those REITs, a couple of operating businesses, of which one was a boutique hotel. From there, we were at the right time at the right place, had a successful exit, and decided we were ready to come back to the States. And I wanted to spend a couple of years really reflecting on who I was as a leader. Did a lot of research, found out that Owen has one of the, if not the best leadership programs in the country, as far as I'm concerned, in addition to a lot of other amazing things. And so found myself at Vanderbilt Owen, which was such a fantastic decision. 2 amazing years, learning both the performance toolkit, right? That's like the finance, the corp valve, marketing, but also what I'll call the inspiration toolkit, and really being intentional about leadership design. And then the past 10 years of my career have been in some form of hypergrowth, which actually lends itself well to technology. So most recently was the Chief Operating Officer for Built Technologies. Built an awesome, fintech company here in Nashville. I think our claim to fame is were the first tech unicorn in the state of Tennessee, and it was fun to be a part of their journey. I joined right after they raised their Series B and took them through late stage D. Was there for 4 years. After 4 amazing years at Built, took a step back, did a mini sabbatical to reflect again, right, on leadership. And then most recently joined HireRight, which is an HR technology company, really in the business of workforce intelligence, background screening, identity, et cetera. Our world headquarters are here, about 5,000 person organization, and I'm their Chief Strategy and Transformation Officer.
Wow, so lots of pivots, but the underlying theme behind all these pivots to me is the intentionality, like we talked about. And so you mentioned a term, intentional design, and I think I might steal it. I love it. But really living your life with that intentional design. And so I want to ask you, Jamie, when did intentional design first show up in your life, and what made it stick when you make career decisions?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'd say probably intentional design started earlier than I realized, and it probably is for so many of you that are listening in. It really started with this concept of this mirror, right? It's this concept of motivators and stressors. And what I'd say is it's when I stopped just paying attention to what I'm good at, right? I went to iBanking because, maybe I'm good with numbers or finance. And also started layering in when I am most energized or most stressed, right? And I think that's a different way to think about it, right? I'm not just making decisions because I'm good at something. I'm also making decisions because I'm energized about something, right? And I kept kind of noticing patterns, right? I noticed that there were certain roles, there were certain cultures, there were certain environments where I would come home and I was alive, right? My husband would probably say the same thing. I was alive. I was jazzed up. And then there were times where I'd come home and I may have been performing just fine, right? Like we were hitting our results, was doing fine in the role, but I was drained, right? Like you could feel it. And maybe you guys have been there before where you just, you kind of feel it. And what I started doing was writing it down and naming it, right? Like I started being just very intentional, and that truly was for me the beginning of intentional design, right? It was writing out that mirror, those motivators and those stressors. And I think what it took me a while to realize, but if I have some advice here, is I think the best career decisions came down for me and continue to come down for me for knowing myself clearly and not really chasing the next shiny thing, right? Maybe what I'm good at, maybe what everyone else wants, but really what is designed by motivations and stressors. Right?
So, Jamie, you've said before when we had the privilege of meeting you 2 weeks ago that pivot moments are the most revealing.
Yeah.
And as I've listened to your story then and now, what stands out is that every move you make is very reflective rather than reactive.
Right.
Looking back, what decision rule guide was one that like moves you from one pivot to another? How did you know it was time to make a change? And what told you it was the right one?
Yeah, I think, for me it circles back to it's all kind of about alignment. And I think it's alignment of both energy, right? That's that mirror that I talk about, motivators and stressors. And it's alignment of what I call the compass, right? The values, my values. And I think in every pivot for me, it came down to kind of two core questions. Is this work moving me towards a place where I'm more energized than I've ever been, right? I think that's kind of point number one. And then I think point number two is, does this align with how I want to live and lead, right? Live and lead being the team that I'm surrounding myself, live being both professionally and personally. And so, I think it's those two concepts working together that I think ultimately have been the hallmark of these pivot moments.
Okay, really great concepts we can take away here today. So you touched upon your stint in Panama, and I kind of want to talk about that more. So you have said, transformation is more leadership than PowerPoint. I love that line.
Mm-hmm.
So can you share what that meant in practice?
Yeah.
How did that realization change how you led day to day and across cultures?
Yeah, it was, that was a big moment for me, right? So recall my background here. I've done iBanking at this point. I've done consulting. And I think I moved down to the nation of Panama. We had this, concept of what would be true. And I did what any good consultant did. I had my 52-page PowerPoint deck and I was ready to go, right? Like I was going to crush. We had this vision and this deck and we had all the financials and everything was great. And here to this point, I had led with frameworks and analytics, right? And probably to some extent title helped a little bit get done what I needed to. And I think I showed up with this PowerPoint deck. I don't think any of my team had ever seen PowerPoint before, frankly, right? I had team members that just were, just had a plethora of backgrounds, each one so beautiful. Some had never gone to school. Some didn't have electricity. Some were wickedly sharp. Some had never been exposed to toolkits. And what I realized is, wait, I got to back up here. This is not about a PowerPoint. This is building slides. This is about building trust. This is about building belief in where we're headed, right? And so I think it was one of those aha moments for me where, and I say this to my teams all the time, right? Culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? I had to really focus on rallying everyone around what the vision was, getting everyone's input, right? Put the PowerPoint deck aside. And, maybe we unearthed aspects of it later and a lot of it ended up working out, but it wasn't about the PowerPoints. It was about building belief, right?
So good. I love that you think in frameworks. And I'm very curious about your mirror framework, your motivators and stressors.
Yeah.
Can we take a sneak peek
Yeah.
into your mirror framework? What's on your list today?
Yeah.
And how do you revisit those motivators and stressors, especially since your time at Owen?
Yeah, I love it. By the way, this is one of my favorite interview questions. I ask anyone I interview what their motivators and stressors are. So my motivators and stressors are pretty straightforward, right? But they've taken some time to develop, and I'm going to say them pretty easily, and they're going to roll off my tongue, but by no means construe that for, this is just a quick thing. I spent a lot of time reflecting on when I was energized most and when I was not, and I'd say, my motivators, things that energize me most are kind of threefold. I think one, am I or can I be passionate about the problem I'm solving, right? That is very intentionally motivator number one for me. And my opinion is, life is way too short not to solve interesting problems. If I can't be passionate about it, once I dig in, that's kind of problem one is solved. I think maybe 1B in terms of motivators, am I working with amazing humans, right? And I think, sometimes you take that for granted, right? Maybe all of us have had amazing work experiences and we've had some ones that aren't. Life is, again, too short not to work with humans that don't inspire you every single day. And from leaders to peers to the teams that you get to build out, I think that's incredibly important. I think my third one is, am I set up in a position where I can add disproportionate value, right? Like I want to enter a company, a position, and be able to add some value. And if I'm not able to add value because of my own unique skill set, then maybe it's not a great fit. That's when I find myself that energy level draining. I think stressors for me generally bureaucracy, right? Fully built playbooks, right? So lack of ambiguity, I would say. I love ambiguity. Everybody doesn't love ambiguity, so I think that's one. Monotony tends to be one, right? Those tend to be the stressors.
Great. Thanks for sharing. How do you set us up for success, Jamie? We want to have a similar degree of clarity like you do.
Yeah.
How can we move on from here to build our own list of stressors and motivators? How do we come up with our own mirror list?
Yeah, your own mirror list, right? Should you guys decide this is an intentional framework that you want to build out, I think that there are a couple prompts that I might pose, because as you build out your own. And again, write them down. Don't overthink it. Write it down. Look at those pivot moments when you were pivoting because maybe you were stressed or maybe because you were jazzed and you had an opportunity to take it to the next level. I'd say, again, motivators are the times in your career where you are literally jazzed to jump out of bed and to hop on the Zoom or go into the office, right? That's that moment I want you to really, really think about. And I want you to think about when those moments, like what are you most energized by? What are the type of problems that you're tackling that you're almost losing track of time because you are so immersed in the problem? And maybe it's a culture. Maybe what are the people that you find yourself most inspired by, right? Maybe there's a leader archetype that you said, gosh, that's the type of leadership piece. As you think about the stressors are always what I say, those are almost, it's the people project type of work that comes across your desk that almost makes you have to get up and take a walk around the building, right? Maybe we've all had those moments, right, where right, you have to take a deep breath. And I think, those are the moments when I would challenge everyone to take a look in the mirror and say, when was I successful and yet I was really drained, right? Those are telltale moments, right? You're winning. You're producing the results and yet you're drained doing it. Or when do I reflect on my career that I almost feel like I'm pushing a boulder uphill, right? Like those are really the prompts that I would say, again, don't overthink it. Those are the prompts that I would say, that's what really becomes the culmination of those motivators and stressor, kind of list. And so, what I've found is in terms of my overall satisfaction, it's those things that matter a heck of a lot more than any title or compensation package that I've ever had, right? Those are the ones.
So I think of guideposts as like frameworks, and all of us are business school students
Yes.
here. Jamie,
Love
you
a
were a
framework.
former business school student, and so, we all love our frameworks. And so we talked about the mirror, and now we're going to talk about the compass, which is another one of your guideposts. And to remind everyone, the compass are, our core values that guide our daily behaviors and decisions. And it's so important to have that level of self-awareness and to evaluate what are our core values and begin evaluating that every couple of years as well, because they can change.
That's right.
So can you discuss some of your core values, your compass, and then how they affect your decision-making as a leader?
Yeah, I'm happy to do so. And I do think they're incredibly important because at the end of the day, whether we like it or not, we are making decisions because these things exist within us. We are often triggered because these things exist within us. So the more that we can be aware of what these things are within us, the better off we are, right? So I've got 5 core values that I've kind of articulated. Interestingly enough, they've generally withheld the test of time, right? They look a little something like this, right? Family is a core value of mine. It's top on the list. Integrity is a core value of mine. It's top on the list. Relationships are a core value of mine. Passion is a core value of mine. And then wisdom, right? Both learning and teaching. These are kind of core values of mine. How do they show up or how might my team perceive them? It's interesting, like in practice, what do those look like with my team? And I would say, for me, if I've got a core value that's family, first of all, I share those whenever I either join a team, hire a new team member, et cetera, and I ask my team members to share them back to me, right? Like that is an expectation that I've got. I share it with them. It's my way to get to know my team better, but hopefully just be very vulnerable in terms of who I am as a leader. Family, right? For example, I've got family on that core value list. My team knows that I try to make family dinner almost every night if I can, right? Like that's core to who I am. integrity is one. And what's integrity mean to me? It's not just making, ethical decisions. That's the obvious thing. I think it really is so many ways, as you think about integrity, it really is having hard conversations early and often, right? I feel like candor is kindness. And so my team knows of me. I'm going to give feedback when I need to, but I'm doing it because I want them to grow. And I also expect the same thing in me, right? So when I give feedback, that's kind of how it shows up on a day-to-day basis. I think from a wisdom perspective, I will over-invest in the why to make sure the team understands, here's why we're doing this strategic thing, right? Like this is why it matters, and here's how you can play a role into it. So that's kind of a little bit more about that compass aspect and how I use it and what it shows up as, right?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Continuing on the theme of frameworks, I'd love to talk about the MAP, your teachable point of views, your TPOVS, and how they have helped you to set expectations and communicate how you lead.
Yes.
So which TPOV has made the biggest impact for you? Which is the one that makes you feel like you are leading authentically rather than forced?
Yeah. So TPOVs, actually, this is one of my Owen professors introduced this concept to me, and I fell in love with it, right? So TPOV, teachable point of view, as you mentioned, Marissa, it's the things that you almost say so often that your team gets sick of hearing you say. But the value in that one is when you leave the room, right, they know how you'd make a certain decision, right? They know what you stand for. And I think there's something to be said for that. And in turn, I collect my team's TPOVs, right? And I've learned a ton from my team and all of my leaders who have these great teachable points of view, right? And they're generally pithy things. Often they're not my own. I can't take credit for it, right? You guys heard me say one of them earlier, culture eats strategy for breakfast. That's a good old Drucker quote. I think it's so, so true. Cannot take credit for it. I already mentioned another one. I do think clarity is kindness, right? And I think what that means for me, it's not only hard messages, but that TPOV means also that I'm a really transparent leader. I do believe more is more. I will very, very vocally, like I had a team stand up today where, it was my job to work with my team to share what happened in the boardroom last week, right? And I spent 30 minutes just debriefing the team in terms of what happened, the good, the bad, and the ugly, the hard feedback we got from the board, the great feedback we got. Because again, clarity is kindness. That helps my team grow. That helps my team know the focus of the board, like these things matter. Probably the phrase that my team, if they were in the room, would say they hear most from me is structure follows strategy, right? It's one that I live by. It sounds pretty simple at face value, but my team knows, I don't want to see an org design chart before I understand your strategy, right? Like I don't want to see a budget before I know where you're headed and what you're going to deliver. And then let's look at the structure, the P&L behind it, to bring that to life, right? And so again, they're probably sick of hearing me say it. Everyone could say it on repeat, but these are a couple of those TPOVs that kind of stick with what gets measured gets managed, right? All these are the fun ones I can't take credit for, but are things that my team hears me say often.
So good. Jamie, one thing I admire about you is that you pivot with clarity.
Yeah.
In the course of your career pivots, you've mentioned that the phase of a business and its life cycle determines your North Star, and it guides which company you would choose.
Yes.
And why you would choose that company.
Yeah.
And for you, it's the hyper-growth stage of a business. That's your North Star. That's your key mode when you join a company.
Yes.
What's your guidance to us as students and aspiring business leaders?
Yes.
How can we figure out what stage or kind of a business space or environment would fit us the best? How do we know it?
Yeah, this is a fun one. So we had that conversation, right? I think when we all met a couple weeks ago, where I shared that one of the things that I had an aha moment, probably over the past decade, where I realized, I don't know if we still use the FIG equation at Owen, right? Where a lot of times we'll talk about our careers in terms of what function should we pursue, right? Maybe I'm finance, or I'm ops, or I'm strategy, or what industry do I want to go after? I want to go after tech, I want to go after hospitality. Maybe it's CPG, right? Or maybe geography is how you decide your next role, right? Like I want to live in Nashville, I want to live in New York, I want to live in the Bay Area. And what I realized is actually none of those ultimately for me tend to be the right answer in terms of when I was most satisfied. It took me a while to realize that actually phase of a business life cycle was one of the biggest indicators of how happy I was, how fulfilled I was. And so to your point, if you think about the 5 phases of a business life cycle, there's startup mode, right? Like you're going to pivot 100 times because you have to, because you got to get to the right answer that gets you to product market fit. Then there's growth phase, right? You've hit product market fit. You're really leaning into one model, trying to get that thing, distribution. Then there's hypergrowth, right? And perhaps you're scanning beyond a single product, single line of business. Maybe it's to a platform play, but you are moving very, very quickly. Then there's a 4th stage, just maturity. You're given a playbook when you walk into mature companies. Do the playbook, only the playbook, and nothing more, nothing less. And then there's turnarounds or transformations, which is, what we're doing isn't working. We got to rethink it. And I think I had that aha moment, which is, for me, you throw me in a mature company, I'm pretty frustrated. Like I love ambiguity. I don't want to be given a playbook. I want to write the playbook. You throw me in a pure play startup, perhaps I'm not perfect either, right? I want to write a 5-year strategy. I want to put infrastructure in place to help scale a business. Startups don't need that. But hypergrowth and transformations are very, very similar, right? You have to be willing to navigate a heck of a lot of ambiguity. You have to be willing to tear things down that you've built, because what got you today won't get you tomorrow. And so you have to be prepared to tear the thing down that you built, don't fall in love with the model, and rebuild it again and rebuild it better, right? And same thing is true on transformations. And so, built was hypergrowth, right? There was nascency in terms of scale, infrastructure, strategy. At Hire Right, it's a turnaround or transformation in the growth mindset, right? It's this beautiful company that, we've got 40,000 customers globally, and they're amazing customers. And now we're thinking through this next iteration of AI and modernization. And what do we do now, right? And how do we rethink everything? And so that for me was one of that intentional design moments where I thought, right, relative to that mirror, I got to throw in this new aspect in its phase of a business life cycle.
Sounds like you have the perfect role right now, Chief Strategy and Transformation Officer. So you mentioned that you had a sabbatical for 9 months in 2020, and this was kind of at the height of your career.
Yep.
You took a break. You called this your strategic reset.
Yep.
And you really updated what your motivators were and what your values were, and you also took this time to study AI. So what did your sabbatical really teach you about decision-making and clarity as a leader?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think, so it was in 2024, so I did it right before I joined Hire Right, and I reached that point where I was just wrapping up at Built, and I found myself in constant momentum and margin mode, right? Like I'm living life on the margin. There's really not time to reflect. There's really not time to make sure that I'm on the right path, right? And I wanted to take a sabbatical because I really wanted to step back and say, hey, am I headed in a direction that I'm constantly being energized? And by the way, there's this really interesting thing happening right now. It's called AI, and what's this going to do to the business world? And so I stepped back from Built, and I took a risk, and I said, I'm not going to have the next thing lined up, and that feels very risky. I don't know if I know a couple of you guys are in the strategy function. We are known to be like very, I have to have a plan. There's always a plan, right? And so it was this very risky moment where I'm like, it's the first time I'm going to pause, not have a plan, not have an answer, and just not be in momentum mode and actually just reflect and figure out what AI is going to mean as an executive, and figure out what it means to have some margin, and take the time to, join some great non-for-profits or other boards and do some fractional exec work and be a mom, right? Be a mom and enjoy some of that too. And so it was a beautiful phase. And, what I learned is, I think I learned a little bit more balance, learned a lot about AI, and still learning. And then I think I really allowed myself to kind of rework some of the things that motivate me most, because they do change, right? They do change very much. And so having the opportunity to just, it wasn't a luxury. I'd argue it's an important thing, right? To stay energized, to refuel. And so learned a lot in that time.
You mentioned it briefly, your own personal board of directors.
Yeah.
And this is something that I learned last mod, and some of us have learned last year, thanks to Ranga's MOE class. Shameless plug for first years.
Love it.
And
Love it.
I love that concept because it's both strategic and also deeply human.
Yes.
What does your board look like? And who's on it? How often do you check in? And what kinds of questions are you bringing to them particularly when you're making those big decisions?
Yeah, it's that's that feedback loop that I talk about, right? It's an accountability standard. And by the way, I love that that's a part of the program and the curriculum. Like, I cannot speak highly enough about having a personal board of directors. I said in the beginning, I'll say it again. One mentor cannot be expected to provide all the right guidance and all the right support, right? And in many ways, there aren't many shortcuts to experience, but this personal board of directors happens to be one of those ones that you can kind of crack the code on a little bit, right? And so as I've kind of thought about my own personal board of directors, I always look for someone that is in a similar role to me, right? Doesn't have to be in my industry, but I want to have someone on my personal board of directors that's in a chief strategy role or chief operating role at a similar stage company. So you can say like, hey, what are you seeing? What are you doing? What business models are changing? How are you thinking about AI governance, right? How are you thinking about establishing value creation plans? Like there is deep value to that. I always want to have an industry peer, not in my own company, but I want to have someone that knows the industry that I'm in, particularly when you're in a new industry, right? I entered HireRight. I was not HR technology before, right? I knew technology. I didn't know HR technology. I certainly didn't know the background screening industry. I needed someone that I could call, and I'm happy to ask a lot of dumb questions of my team members, but that I could, just call and say, like, can you just spend 30 minutes with me explaining this compliance juggernaut, right? So I need that. I always have a mentor, right? Someone that I look up to, someone that mirrors the type of leadership that I want to embody, right? And again, not to emulate, but to really think through. And then I always have what I call Watson, right? And this can be a best friend. This can be someone that can just give you hard answers, that can tell you, I think you're thinking about this totally wrong, right? And so, often the questions that I'm asking, what am I missing? Where am I wrong? What should I be thinking about for the next piece, right? I mean, these are just the simple questions that when I'm hanging out with my personal board of directors, it doesn't have to be really complex, but like, help me think through, where could I stub my toe, right? If you were to do it again in half the time, what would you do differently? These are the type of questions that I've found a lot of value in.
Great. How can students start building their own personal board of directors? And very importantly, how can we maintain those relationships over time?
Yeah, I'd truly start with curiosity, right? Don't think about it as networking. First of all, assume that people want to help. I don't know about, any of you guys, but I think I always had this fear that, it's just going to be a burden. Like that, they don't have time, right? They've got so much going on. And I have just been genuinely both gifted with, but surprised by the fact that just how generous people are, right? Because my chances are that maybe those that you would be reaching out to have also stood on the shoulders of giants, and they also want to give back. So I say first thing, like just make the ask. And second of all, don't do it out of networking, do it out of curiosity, right? It doesn't have to be formal. It can be set up in a cadence because your mentor likes more structure. It can be like, hey, cool, I'm going to text you when I've got this issue. Is that fine, right? But I mean, start simple, start easy, think through a couple of the archetypes that matter most to you. I shared mine with you guys, but think through the ones that would matter most to you guys, right?
So I can't believe it, but we're already at the Q&A part of our podcast. And because of this special occasion of doing a live podcast, we wanted to invite students at Owen to ask questions.
Yes.
And thank you to those that participated. We really appreciate it. Mari will start us off with the first question.
Yeah, we received several questions from the Owen students. So the first one I have for you, Jamie, is how do you lead assertively while making your followers still like you? Being too friendly makes people lax, but being assertive makes people not like you. How do you balance that?
Oh, that's a fun
It's
one.
a big question.
That's a fun one. That's a fun one. Yeah, and it's interesting because this is where two of my values can sometimes be at odds, right? I've shared with you guys, I've got this, I care deeply about relationships. I really do. Man, and I care about just, working with great humans, learning from great humans, whether they report to me, whatever the case may be, whether I report to them, I value that deeply. Simultaneously, integrity is very important to me, right? And this concept of, clarity is kindness, right? And getting hard things out first, and those can often be at odds. I'd say, as I think about assertiveness, really, my answer ultimately to this one would be, if you establish trust first, that really gives you, and you share that hey, listen, I'm going to move quickly. We may not always have time to explain, but if you will trust me, if you believe in me, we'll get to the right answer, right? And so I think it is building the trust first. I think it is letting the team know your work styles, right? And maybe sometimes you're going to go quick and maybe you're not. And then creating space on the flip side to say, but hey, if I got this wrong, if I was too harsh, right, please let me know. I think it's just kind of that simple, right? But it has to start with the team has to really trust your intentions, I think, before you get that right?
For our second question, looking back since graduating from Owen, what leadership lesson do you wish you learned earlier in your career?
So I'd say it's interesting. Probably maybe through my time at Bain, maybe a little further. I think what was interesting is I would say I was really, probably through Owen, generally we are rewarded for saying yes, right? Throughout our careers, especially early in our careers, we get rewarded for saying yes and doing more and doing more. And I think there's a really interesting pivot that happens from a leadership perspective and as you work your way up where it becomes increasingly important to say no. And it's not no for the sake of no. It's no because you can't have 100 priorities at once, right? And as a matter of fact, it's my job to help my team who has a million things going on and saying, but 95 of those we're going to put on the cutting room floor. We're going to say no to, right? Or it's my job to say, this is great. 2 projects hit the hurdle rate, but one of them we're going to have to say no to because we don't have the budget for both. And so I think it took me a while to kind of get to, I think it was probably post-Owen that I realized, man, this is a big shift for me to go from being rewarded to saying yes. And those rewards are strong, right? You get acknowledged, you get recognized for saying yes, and suddenly you're no longer being recognized for saying yes, and the more you say yes could actually be damaging to you. So I think that was a big flip. And I do think these guideposts in many ways have helped with that. In many ways we're informed by that, but I needed those quick frameworks to be able to draw from and say, I'm going to have to make a decision quick, right? And this is my no, right?
That's powerful because this is a cohort of yes.
It is.
So.
It is, right? It is. And that's a hard lesson, especially when you want to be able to, you want to do more, but it's not always the best thing to do.
So true. Here's another question from the audience. What were some of the biggest changes you made from your second year at Owen into your new career after graduation till date? Do you wish you made any of those big changes sooner?
Biggest changes that I made probably gets back to saying no. And I think probably saying no, and I would say the other thing is really understanding my motivators. I still think that right after Owen, it was still very easy to fall in love with what I was good, or to pursue things that I was either good at, or the compensation was great, or the title was great. And I wish sooner I'd have said, you know what, but this isn't a problem that I'm passionate about, right? Or this isn't a group of people that perhaps I'm as challenged or inspired by. Not that they're not great humans, I'm just not independently challenged, or I don't feel like I'm adding value in the right way. So I wish I would have leaned in to those motivators and stressors a little bit sooner, and saying no,
I believe we have time for one more audience question. So our last question today is, at what stage of your life did you know you were a great leader? And was there an experience that defined that moment for you?
Ooh. So the answer is no. I mean, right, I don't think, maybe no one ever really thinks they're a great leader. I don't think there's a finish line with leadership, right? I would generally say there's never a finish line with leadership. I would say when I, as a leader, probably feel most proud is when I see some of my team members maybe picking up some of these concepts, right? It's been really cool to me throughout my career to maybe even hear my leaders come to me and they're like, Jamie, I've got this new TPOV, what do you think? Or Jamie, I was leaning into my motivator list and this is what I found out, right? And it's just super cool. That's leadership at scale, and I think as leaders, that's the best thing we can hope for, is to actually be able to scale some cool concepts in a way that serves others, right? And hopefully we're doing some good along the way. So
I think that's huge. It's one thing to be a good leader yourself, but then to be able to pass it on to your team.
Yeah.
It's a defining factor.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Jamie, this indeed has been a powerful and thought-provoking conversation. Thank you so much for helping us to see that intentional leadership and indeed living by design are not mere concepts. You brought them to life through your reflection, your pivots, and indeed your values. And to everyone here listening and those streaming online, remember that intentional leadership is not about having all of the answers today. It's about asking yourself the right questions, asking those around you the right questions, and of course, taking the next step with purpose. A huge thank you to Melissa and Marie, my phenomenal co-hosts, and of course the production team and the incredible team at the LDP. By the way, happy anniversary to the LDP.
20th. What a milestone.
Thank you, Jamie, for inspiring us to lead and to live by design. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the 1000 Ways to Lead podcast. I'm Taiwo Olawaimi. Thank you so much for joining us.
Awesome. Thank you, Tyra. Thank you.
That's great.
Thank you, everybody. Welcome. We finished our live podcast.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Whew.